And we're back with Steve, Republican of Iowa and member of the Judiciary Subcommittee on Immigration and Border Security. You have been vocal about immigration reform in light of what happened in Boston. Here's a story on the Huffington Post. Steve King, Boston bombing should delay immigration reform. Why is that?
Because we need to now, we have a real reason in front of us to step back and look at all of the means and methods by which people come into this country for whatever their motive is, whether it's to do us harm, whether it's to be here to work, whether it's to trade drugs, whatever it might be. And this illustrates the openness of the visas that we have. There are multiple visas. The 19 bombers, the September 11th bombers, the hijackers, I should say, many of them came in on visitors' visas that extended for 6 months. They did their death before they're expired. But we also have student visas that essentially aren't traced down. There are thousands of people whose students' visas have expired. We have people that come in our ports of entry, whether it would be our land ports or our seaports or our airports, and there's just simply not a means to go back and check and see if they ever went back home again. We passed the law to get that done, an entry-exit visa system. We only have the entry, not the exit. We need to put the exit in place, and we need to understand how dangerous it is.
Well, Homeland Security Secretary Janet Napolitano testified recently that the immigration bill put forth by the Gang of Eight in the Senate, this would help solve that problem. The bill requires that passports be electronically readable as opposed to having to be manually input. It really does a good job of getting human error out of the process.
That's true. I wouldn't disagree with that. But we've passed the law back as far as 1996. It's not implemented. I've stood on the border where Janet Napolitano, of course, has the authority there, and watched as people drive into the United States from Mexico, swipe their card. I see their identification come up on the screen, and stand there and talk to the agent. An hour later, the car would come back and go back into Mexico without stopping. And I just asked the question, why don't they swipe going out? Well, we don't have that system working. The resources would be there if the administration were willing to put it in place, and I'd certainly be willing to help them with that. And I don't think we need to grant an amnesty to 11 or 20 million people just to get an entry-exit visa system in place. That seems to be the bargain from the administration, however.
You heard from the Congressman Adam Schiff, our previous guest, saying that he thinks, too, that this immigration bill would help bring people who are entering and exiting our country into the system, that we would have the ability to track, a better ability to track them than we do have now.
We would have a better ability to track them if we put the entry-exit visa system in place. The law's there for that. I'd be happy to appropriate to that. But it is not going to bring people out of the shadows that are felons, that are criminals, that are terrorists, unless, of course, we just want to legalize terrorists, and it gives them an easier access to our society rather than a more difficult access to our society. There was a tremendous amount of fraud in the amnesty in 1986, and I don't think Ronald Reagan would do that again if he had a chance.
Here is the Wall Street Journal with the headline, Immigration Bill Uncertain in the House. There is a Gang of Eight, as you know, in the House that's working on a proposal similar to what the Senate has done. Patrick O'Connor and Corey Bowles, though, write that is uncertain. Now, more than 7 years later, many lawmakers who backed that bill are vowing another tough stand if the Senate passes a bill to expand work visas. You're quoted in here, it will have to be killed in the House. Why do you say that?
Because I think that enough Republicans have bought into it in the Senate, and because the numbers have shifted over on the Senate side, so that the momentum that they've created there will be slowed down by, I think, a very intense battle in the Senate. And I do think the Boston bombings caused a lot more focus on the national security side of this debate than we would have seen otherwise. But I expect that something will come out of the Senate, and I'm concerned that in the House there could be any immigration that could be passed, such as, say, E-Verify, could be messaged over to the Senate, and at that point, the leadership in the House and the Senate could appoint a conference committee which might produce a result of the Senate's amnesty bill, send that back to the House, and if that would put on the floor of the House for a vote, unamendable, conference report, yes or no, up or down, all Democrats would vote for it. Some Republicans would vote for it. That's how a really bad bill could get to the president. I'm very concerned about that.
So you think there are enough Republicans that could pass some sort of compromise bill? This is from the Wall Street Journal. Some 107 of the 233 Republicans in the House started this Congress with less than 3 years of experience. So they weren't around when George W. Bush tried this. The newcomers include Representative Blake Farenthold, a Republican of Texas, who represents a district where Hispanics account for nearly 50% of the population.
I think that those things are a factor. One are the Hispanic composition of some of the Senate or some of the House races, and especially in Texas, there are several others that would fit a similar category. That's one of the factors. But another one is that of these 107 Republicans that 28 months ago were not in Congress, they have not been through an immigration debate. This is one of the most complicated issues that Congress ever faces. There's piece after piece of this that changes the way you understand it, and really, we're looking into the future of America. This is one we must get it right. If there is an amnesty bill that's passed, and we cannot then undo it. We could repeal Obamacare and put it back where it is, but we can't undo the instant legalization of everybody that's here in America, and we can't undo the invitation that goes to all of the people that have been deported that says you may qualify to come back again. This is an outrageous reach. It's beyond the concept of anything we could have discussed even a year ago. And because the president has said he will not enforce immigration law unconstitutionally, I would say, now there are some Republicans that say we must somehow make a deal with that decision that when the president decided he's not going to uphold his oath of office.
Let me show you and our viewers a new ad blitz put out by Facebook's leader, Mark Zuckerberg, and his group. We'll show that to you and get your take on what impact you think this will have on those Republicans in the House. Take a look.
Anyone who thinks that what we have now in immigration is not a problem is fooling themselves. What we have in place today is de facto amnesty.
Conservative leaders have a plan, the toughest enforcement measure in the history of the United States.
They have to pass the background check. They have to be able to pay a registration fee. They have to pay a fine.
Border security on steroids, tough border triggers, and no giveaways for lawbreakers.
No federal benefits, no food stamps, no welfare, no Obamacare. They have to prove that they're gainfully employed.
Bold, very conservative, a tough line on immigration.
Steve King.
You can't call that plan very conservative. I can call it bold. It's a bold amnesty plan. And I was able to take a look at the bill before it was actually released and started to read down through it. It has a promise of a plan to provide border security on the southern border. It hands it over to Janet Napolitano, her judgment and discretion on which sections of the border they would focus on, and it says you should get 90%, stop 90% of the people that you see in those sections of the border. It's not as good a promise as we had in '86. It's not as good a promise as we've had all along. It's a 5-year plan, and everybody is instantaneously legalized. A background check, you can't do a background check on people that don't have a legal existence even in their home country. All that is run through NCIC, National Crime Information Center, and ICE's system. If they don't show up in ICE's system, that's the background check. You must interview people to do a real background check. They're not going to interview 11 to 20 million people. So I think there's a lot in that. It's a pretty outrageous reach. I can use that word bold, but it's a bold amnesty plan, and it's not very conservative. In fact, people that are for this plan, I don't know how they present themselves as conservative, because what they've really done is they've served up the rule of law and decided we're going to sacrifice this on the altar of political expediency.
But does it make you concerned that that kind of ad helps their cause, and that could lead to a bill being passed?
It does concern me, and that's one of the reasons why I've stepped up and been a lot more vocal on this issue. I wanted to keep my powder dry on this, Greta. I was hoping that the others would step up. I was hoping that saner heads might prevail in the Senate or in the House. And as the inertia of this thing moved forward, a little over 2 weeks ago, I finally decided if I don't step up, nobody is going to step up. And so now we have a working group that has carrying this message out across through the media, and I think a lot of Americans are getting a better look at what's really in the bill. And when they release the bill, that's when they become most vulnerable, because reality sets in. The language in the bill blows a lot of holes in the ad that we just saw.
All right. Well, House Judiciary Committee, which you serve on, will be doing its own legislation. How will it be different? What will you have in your bill?
I think,
or bills?
Yes, I think it's bills, Greta, and I think it's most likely to come one piece at a time. I know that we've got some discussion about making E-Verify mandatory. I've supported that, although I have my reservations in that anything that I've seen that has any kind of bipartisan support on this also actually prohibits the employers from using E-Verify on current employees. And I think that puts such a big hole in it that they're really not serious about enforcement. But I think that we're likely to have hearings on a number of different concepts, and then we're likely to consider the idea then whether any bill comes forward before the Judiciary Committee. And I continue to make the case, as I did yesterday with some of the other members of the committee, any bill that comes out of the House that goes over to the Senate turns it into something that could conference with the Gang of Eights bill. If we get that back without amendment, all Democrats will vote for it, a handful of Republicans will. We could get a colossal amnesty plan that legalizes everybody that's in this country, with a few exceptions, instantly and perpetually, because the promise would be, if you could get into the United States after this bill is passed, they're not going to deport people that come in after their deadline if they are not willing to do it today. And I think the public also should know that there was a suit brought against the President's DREAM Act executive edict. And that suit has a decision now out of the courts in Houston, a federal district court in Houston. Out of the 10 points that we brought forward on that, the unconstitutional aspects of legislating by executive edict, the court found 9 of them in the favor of we, the Constitution, the rule of law, Chris Crane, the president of ICE. And on the 10th one, they sent it back and said, we got to write that a little better, government, because I don't want to make a decision on it. So this very well could be that the president's initiative has now been blocked by the courts, and that hasn't hit the news yet.
Let's get to phone calls. Shirley's been waiting in Anson, Texas. Republican caller. Hi there.
Hi, Greta. Thank you. Mr. King, I can't tell you how much I admire you. I've watched you through the years, and I know how patriotic you are. What this American people are feeling that the government has turned against us. In the last 30 years, we have absorbed 20% of the population of Mexico. Nobody realizes that. And with family reunification, with millions being brought in, we will have 100 million people in here from across the Mexican border. It's not all Mexicans anymore. But we feel like we've been betrayed. We feel like the government is cheapening citizenship so much for political reasons that we're willing to destroy the country, the very culture of our country. Here in Texas, the president said that they won't have any benefits. Well, here in Texas, we have been educating children for all of these years at $10,000 a year per child.
Okay. Congressman?
Well, and Shirley, thank you, and I agree with those numbers. There's some other numbers out there that have been there for 2-3 years, put together by Robert Rector of the Heritage Foundation, that shows that a household that's headed by an illegal is a net cost of around $19,500 a year. They'll pay around $9,000 a year in taxes and draw about roughly $30,000 down in public benefits. That's a piece of this. I'm not as troubled by that as I am the oversupply of unskilled labor, which drives up the unemployment rates all across this country. And the numbers that you'll see are roughly 28 million Americans looking for work that are low-skilled, that don't have those opportunities because there's somebody taking those jobs that can't lawfully do that work. There's that piece of it. There are 80 to 90% of the illegal drugs that are consumed in America come from or through Mexico. That's a danger to our society in a lot of ways. And, you know, the demand for drugs in America, we have to carry that burden. That's a guilt that's on us as well, Shirley. And so there's some balance to this thing that we need to be talking about at the same time.
Liz in Texas as well, Democratic caller. Hi, Liz.
Hello. I am an educator. In fact, I came from California, where I taught in a school that is 98% Hispanic. In fact, the Hispanic population, the school children of Hispanic background actually outnumber the other racial groups there. And I moved out here to Texas to teach, and I noticed there's a little bit of there's a contrast. First of all, in terms of whether or not the community actually encourages a group to, gives them opportunities to use Spanish instead of requiring the use of English for, important stuff. Not like school things or whatever, but just, even just with the Spanish option on the phone or Spanish option on the swiping of the card. And that prevents them from actually having to use the language. When they live in enclaves or in a social conclaves, or enclaves, excuse me, they tend to speak their language, speak Spanish a lot. That prevents them from actually assimilating because they don't understand the nuances of our culture. And this is a sad thing, but I am very frustrated with that because in not understanding our culture, they offend. They offend some of my sensibilities. They do crimes and so forth.
Okay. Liz, we'll leave it there.
Well, I'm pleased to hear what you said, Liz, and I actually, something that I've talked about for a long time. I spent 6 years establishing English as the official language of the state of Iowa, and it's because it's a language of opportunity, and it's a language that's inclusive. It's a language of American civilization and culture, and we're not going to have assimilation unless we are speaking the same language. There's been a lot of success in the immersion language immersion, and we have spent a lot of money teaching English as our language, the language of our culture. It does not suppress other cultures. I live in a neighborhood where I can go within, say, 20 miles of my house, and I can show you an Irish town, a Danish town, a German town, a Swedish town. And they came in, adopted English as their language. They embraced the culture and the civilization. They're still Irish, Danish, German, and Swedish, but they understand the American culture because they brought the language in and incorporated it into the culture that they came from. That's what I think needs to happen with the newly arriving immigrants. And I'm for assimilation. It seems like the word assimilation has become a bad word among many of the enclaves that you mentioned there. And that troubles me a lot because if you reject assimilation, you're rejecting one of the most essential components of the success of the melting pot of the United States of America.
Mary Lou, Wallington, New Jersey, independent caller.
Good morning, Greta, and good morning, Congressman King, and it is such a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you for fighting for the American people. I want to make a couple comments that I think a lot of people out there listening this morning are not aware of. First of all, there are not 11.5 million illegal aliens in this country. The number is closer to 25 to 30 based on our own census. Secondly, 70 to 80% of those are from Mexico and South America. Almost half of those are receiving some form of public assistance. $2 billion a year is being spent on illegal aliens in the Medicaid program. What needs to be done here, Congressman, I think, we need to scrap this present bill, and we need to concentrate right now on securing our border. We need to strengthen our E-Verify system, which is 98% effective if it would be used across the entire country. And I think everybody needs to go online and read Senate Bill S-744, and after reading this atrocity, I know they will be calling their representatives and saying no to this bill.
Mary Lou, can I ask you, where did you get those numbers that you cited?
From a very reliable news source, Greta. Very reliable.
Can you tell us what it is?
Well, the Southern Poverty Law Center, Fox News often has cites numbers and figures, Heritage Foundation, a lot of different organizations.
Okay, all right. Go ahead, Congressman.
Well, Mary Lou, the number of how many are here illegally, I don't know that I can anchor that in anything that I can tell you that I know to be fact, but I've said that I think it's somewhere between 11 and 20 million. It could be more than that. We don't really know the answer to that, but the things that you suggest here on how to address this thing, I do agree. One is that we could stop the bleeding at the border, and the resources that we're spending down there are more than $6 million a mile. Now, I think about a mile of gravel road in Iowa from where I live. If Janet Napolitano offered me a contract, a 10-year contract, $6 million a year for 10 years, $60 million, I kind of think I could get a little better security out of that border than what we're getting out of it down there now. So, yes, we can stop the bleeding at the border. That does need to happen, and we could cut off a lot of contraband at the same time. And we know that we have potential terrorists coming across that border. They just become classified information as soon as they're handed over to the FBI. And we can shut off the jobs magnet. E-Verify is a good tool if it's used right and written right. But I also have a bill that I think goes a long ways towards fixing this. It's called the New IDEA Act. And the acronym IDEA stands for Illegal Deduction Elimination Act. It brings the IRS into this, gives the employer safe harbor if they use E-Verify, but denies wages and benefits paid to illegals as a business expense, which results in a taxable income for the employer. That taxable income then turns your $10 an hour illegal into a $16 an hour illegal. That makes it a good business decision to clean up your workforce and use the tools you have, and it doesn't rely on Department of Homeland Security and ICE to go in and bring the punishment for failure to use E-Verify. I have a lot more concern about the IRS showing up sometime than I do ICE showing up sometime.
Bill King on Twitter. You cannot deport 12 million people, and if you did, will Republicans be willing to foot the bill no matter what the cost? Billions.
Well, that's essentially, that's an ages-old canard. You can't deport 12 million people, and we know that because now the numbers that they're using are 11 million people. But I wouldn't say that that's impossible. Neither have I advocated for such a thing. And so that's the difference in footing the bill for it. We know that it's cheaper than the cost of funding them while they're here, and we just had that discussion with one of the previous callers. So instead, though, I say shut off the bleeding at the border, and then shut off the jobs magnet. And when people are encountered by local law enforcement, then they need to be dealt with according to the law. And then if we can reestablish the rule of law, and that means in the minds of the people in this culture, then I'm ready to sit down and have a conversation about what to do with the people that are here, Greta.
Let's talk about economics. Former CBO Director Douglas Holtz-Aiken recently at a hearing before the Senate Judiciary Committee talked about economic benefits of immigration reform. Take a look.
But at its core, immigration reform represents an economic policy opportunity. It is an opportunity for the United States to dictate the evolution of its future population, and as I emphasized in my testimony, in the absence of immigration, low fertility rates mean that the U.S. population declines, and that the future growth of the U.S. is dictated by immigration choices. It will dictate the labor force participation and the effort exerted in our economy. It will have strong influences on the entrepreneurship and small business creation. The evidence is that new immigrants to the United States both work more, their labor force participation rates are higher, and have small businesses at a higher rate. As a result, it will increase the productivity growth in the U.S. economy, the fundamental building block of higher standards of living, and generate larger economic growth numbers than we have seen in recent years.
Congressman?
I think a lot of Doug Holtz-Aiken, and I really like him when I agree with him. And in this case, I don't. And I've read through the 5 or 6 page summary of his report, and I've not gone down into the supporting documents. But what I see in there that he has conflated legal immigration and illegal immigration and put that in his same calculations and disregarded the costs that it takes to support those families. I've already identified the costs that it takes to support those families, and actually it's a little cheaper to sustain an illegal family than it is a legal family because there are more public benefits that will be accessed by the legal family. So it's going to cost more money just to legalize. We know that, and he's not really talking about the costs. But when you conflate the two and talk about birth rates and extrapolate birth rates out into the distance, birth rates change, separate out legal from illegal, and let's put the costs into this equation, and let's talk again, Doug, because I think he's only looked about the extrapolated potential financial benefits. And by the way, who's going to pay the Social Security and the Medicare of the people that he advocates would be paying mine someday? Somebody's got to pay theirs, and there's no solution in that in Doug's report.
Back to Twitter, Doug Canyon says, Mr. King, is E-Verify not a de facto federal work permit?
I hadn't thought about it in those terms, and I like that when a new piece of terminology comes up. Not quite, and not quite because E-Verify just only verifies that the documents that are presented and the data from those documents that go into the E-Verify software program, that they identify someone who can legally and lawfully work in the United States. It doesn't verify biometrics that the person whom you're considering, who has identified themselves with that document, actually connects. So we have the basis of this built now where we have pictures attached to a lot of the E-Verify documents. I think we'll get to that point where we'll have facial recognition biometrics that can be tied to it. At that point, then I would say it would be a de facto work permit. Right now, it's almost that. And let's get it to the point where we can actually do facial verification, and then we won't have multiple people working on a single set of Social Security numbers, which can still happen with E-Verify.
Let's hear from Tony next. West Bloomfield, Michigan, Republican caller.
Hi, I'm going to be whip through these quickly. Please don't cut me off. I think you're amazing, Congressman. If people would have listened to your special order speeches, they'd see how substantive and knowledgeable you are. And it's a shame that you've been disparaged by the pundits and other representatives. People have been saying, oh, there's only a small percentage of the Muslims that are radicals. Do you realize for every 1% is over 100 million people? Coming here for religious freedom, they're allowed to pray 5 times a day. They can wear a burqa there. Instead, they want us to become Sharia compliant. Now, in 1928 in Hebron in Israel, before there was a state of Israel, before Iraq, before Afghanistan, there was a pogrom, and the Jews that lived there ran to the Hadassah hospital to hide, and they thought they would be protected because the hospital took care of the Arabs as well as the Jews. And the Arabs came in the hospital, they hacked to death and cut off limbs.
Tony, what does that have to do with this debate today?
Well, we're talking about justice and the Justice Department and why everything's connected today.
All right, Congressman.
Well, Tony, thank you for what you said. I would say that the numbers that I'm looking at on those that are susceptible to or perhaps aligned with radical Islam were early put out by Daniel Pipes at some number between 10 and 15%. Roughly a little over 1 billion people on the planet are Muslim. That calculates down to around the 100 million or so that you've talked about. So the percentage I wouldn't agree, but the number I essentially do. And that doesn't mean that they're all violent. It just and try to understand this. And if you're of the same race, ethnicity, and religion, you're less likely to be critical of people who are of that same race, ethnicity, and religion. So there's that network out there, and they have come into this country. I think that's easy enough to see. And I don't think that we've done enough to scrutinize who's coming, who's going. I think that's been illustrated by the Boston bombers. I'm concerned about a lot of things with this country, but I want to have border security. I want to have rule of law. And I want to remind people that, there are pillars of American exceptionalism, and you can't reverse engineer America and take some of those pillars out of the way and end up with the United States that we have. And I don't think that you can improve it either by backing up and changing some of this. But one of the essential pillars of American exceptionalism is the rule of law. And if we kick it by the wayside, or as I said, sacrifice it on the altar of political expediency, we can never be the country that we have the potential to continue to grow to become. And that's what troubles me the most. If we sacrifice the rule of law to try to open a conversation up with people that are here illegally, and one of the reasons they came here is because everyone's equal under the law. Lady Justice is blind. If we change that, and the president, by the way, has been very proactive in changing that and undermining the rule of law. If we change that, America cannot be as crystal clear a principled country. Lady Liberty will not be the same. The Statue of Liberty will not mean the same thing. And we want to attract as good a people to the country as we have in the past because we've let our own principles erode. And part of that safety, but much of that is what is all of America going to look like. We have to adhere to those underlying principles and stand and defend them. Thank you, Tony.
Tim, Gainesville, Florida, Democratic caller.
Good morning, Mr. Representative King. How are you?
Good morning. Very good, thanks.
I called in this morning. I was a little concerned about your comments about building a fence and electrifying it. But I also wanted to say I'm the grandson of Jamaican immigrants. And the thing about being a grandson of Jamaican immigrants is that they came to this country, and that tall man that you see with the bow tie marching with Dr. King, that's my grandmother's cousin, Cleveland Robinson. And my grandmother marched for rights in this country. And I think that when we have immigrants come to this country, that they can add to the value of the country. I think it's an added value. And I'll also say this, that I'm disturbed by your comments about this building of a fence and electrifying it because those cattle prongs were used on black people in this country. So I really want to see the Republican Party come around and become a party that I could vote for because I'm a pro-life Democrat. But not with that kind of language. And the last thing I want to say is I've been threatened with terrorism as a teenager. I've been threatened because I lived in the wrong place with the KKK. I've been threatened after losing a job unjustly with the KKK. And I'll tell you something, and I'll tell you something else. If you want to really honor the people that died in Boston, you should listen to that young man. No more hurting people. No more breaking up families through this immigration. You can't deport 12 million people or however million people. And who is really benefiting? It's not just those immigrants. It's the wealthy business people. They're the ones that are benefiting.
Okay, Tim, we'll have the congressman respond.
Well, first, when you said that immigrants can improve this country, I'd like it if you could listen to many of the things that I've said about immigration aside from the comments on the fence. And that says, I have long said that there is an American vigor that's unique, and it comes from this. So the pillars of American exceptionalism, which I briefly referenced earlier, most of them are in the Bill of Rights. We also have free enterprise capitalism. But one of the other, and I said the rule of law, but one of the most important components of this thing that I call American vigor, what we have gotten from legal immigrants is people that had a dream, people that had to struggle to get here, but they knew that they could achieve their potential in America better than any place else in the world. So we didn't just get a random sample of the donor countries that sent people here. We got the most vigor that each of those civilizations had to offer, and that's part of the American character. And you're the third generation from that, as I heard, as your grandparents came here. My grandmother came over here from Germany. She raised 6 boys. She sent 4 of them back to Germany to fight against the fatherland. My father went to the South Pacific, and they embraced America. And I'm proud of what's been accomplished from every country that sent legal immigrants here. So let's think about this American vigor piece. We need to have more dialogue about that. This can-do spirit. When somebody tells an American, you can't do this, it's too hard, we get our back up and we go show them. That's been the American way, and that's because we've gotten people that come here legally from those countries that believe their can-do spirit. With regard to a fence and a wire, that exists all around this country, around factories and sometimes around schools. It exists in Mexico. That very concept only says this, that if you build a fancy wall and a fence, let's shut off the bleeding on the southern border. But when you've got, I will say, a statement like Janet Napolitano that says, you show me a 50-foot fence, I'll show you a 51-foot ladder. We have to use sensory devices on that. If people put a ladder up against a wire, it grounds the wire. We know exactly where that happened. We send our boots on the ground right there. It's an effective and an efficient thing to do because it signals where we can use our resources. So that's all that is. And I'd never advocated that we build 2,000 miles of fence. I would just say, just build it until they stop going around the end. We've got to shut off the jobs magnet, and we've got to stop the bleeding border, and we've got to restore the rule of law. And if we do that, as I said, at that point, I'd be ready to sit down and have a conversation about the rest of the issue that would remain.
Dee Dee Fredericks says, people who come here respecting our laws and wanting to live our values and culture are an asset. Kenneth in New York, independent caller.
Good morning, Congressman.
Morning, Kenneth.
I'm an independent. I've been a long-time Democrat. And I'm so disenfranchised with both of these parties because, they stopped working for the people a long time ago. And basically, what I want to say is that Republicans, you take this immigration issue right now, and because what happened in Boston, and now you're politicizing it. And what I want to see is for most of Democrats and Republicans, because I'm disrespectful, I want a third party, a viable third party that's going to work for the people, because both of you parties do not work for the people as we stand for as right now. But what's going on right now is how you politicize this issue, what happened in Boston, it's a disgrace to me because, people died because of this incident right now. It happened. People had died, and we're suffering. And I live in New York City, and I see what happened through 9/11. And then for politicians to politicize this immigration issue and to take this issue and to make it a political issue, it's disgusting to me, Democrats or Republicans, because, to me it just seems like, this is a terrible and a bad situation that happened in our country. And for somebody to politicize it at this time and stage, and this is time where we're going through so much, and so many people are suffering through the sequester and whatever's going on in our country, and for Republicans particularly to politicize this.
All right, Kenneth, we got the point.
Well, Kenneth, I'm sorry that you're angry about this, and I just think about New York. You're from New York. You saw what happened there. It hit you personally in a lot of ways, like it did to many Americans, and especially in your location, but across the country. The 19 hijackers were immigrants. They overstayed their tourist visas. Generally speaking, that covers most all of that. The bombers in Boston were immigrants. That means that our ports of entry and our border security was, at least need to take a look at it and decide, was it good enough? I don't think so. If it was good enough, we might not have had September 11th. If it was good enough, and I don't know that I know enough about Boston yet, but the question has to be asked. So it's not a matter of politicization. I have long been concerned about this exposure, and I expected that we would have a case like this before now. I think it was inevitable that something like Boston would happen. But let me say some good things about Boston. As I watched that unfold, and as I saw the officers came streaming into Watertown in order to apprehend suspect number 2, people finally came out onto the streets after they'd been sequestered in their homes for 24 hours. They stood along the curb, and when the police officers and the EMT people began driving out, mission accomplished, they applauded, they waved American flags, they chanted USA, USA at the Bruins game. The vocalist stopped singing in the middle of the national anthem to let the crowd finish it because there was such a patriotic wave that has washed over Boston. And at the opening ceremonies at the Red Sox game, one of which had been canceled because of the crisis, there was a tremendous opening ceremony. And when Neil Diamond came down and sang Sweet Caroline on the grass at Fenway Park, I will tell you, they gave the right attitude. They sent the right message. They sent the message around the world. America will not be cowed by terrorists. In fact, we are going to bounce back and will be stronger than before. And anybody watching the Boston game opening that might have been on Al Jazeera TV in the Middle East, they had to think, they didn't get to Americans. Boston showed us that. And New York showed us that also after September 11th. So that's another way of looking at this, Kenneth. I'm sorry that you're disturbed about it. We've got a country to hold together, and I think Boston did a lot to help us with that.
A couple more phone calls here for you, Congressman. Catherine in Minneapolis, Minnesota, Republican.
Hey, I understand all that. I don't know. I'm maybe off the wall, but I believe everybody should be checked. My parents, my father came from Australia, and then my mother's side came from Germany. I think that, traditions have changed.
Okay, Catherine, we're running out of time here with the Congressman. Do you have a quick question for him?
Not.
Okay, we'll just leave it there and go on to Marie in Mount Carmel, Pennsylvania. Democratic caller. Hi.
Hello, Mr. King. On most issues, I disagree with you. However, on this one issue, I do agree with you. The point is this. When you have an illegal, they say Americans will not do this job at all, or that job. But Americans can't compete at the wages that they can pay illegal immigrants to do the job because most of them are paid off of the books. When they get injured, they use an emergency room, and then the taxpayers or the insurance payers pay the premiums. I agree with you, and I believe that we should not have a problem deporting these 12 million people. They should be gone and come back legally rather than being here illegally and costing us taxpayers money. And I'll take your response off the air. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And just to comment on that, I'll give you an example. I live in an area where there's large packing industry, meat industry, so the beef packing and pork production, and now turkeys and eggs. And the town that I was born in, Storm Lake, Iowa, has an elementary school that's about 85% minorities. In that town, it used to be the people that worked in that packing plant 25 years ago made about the same amount of money as a teacher did. And now they make about half that amount of money that a teacher does. The reason is because there is an oversupply of underskilled labor. We need a tighter labor supply. If we enforce our laws, that'll tighten up our labor supply on the underskilled, and that'll allow that American or legal immigrant who, say, graduates from high school, doesn't want to go on to higher education. Everybody is not wired for college. And so that person that could stay home, punch the time clock, go to work, pay for a modest home, send their own kids to college, that dream is gone for those undereducated Americans. And one of the reasons is because we have an oversupply of unskilled and underskilled and undereducated labor. So I think we need a tighter supply, and that means enforce the law. That's 8 million jobs for Americans, and I don't think there's a single job in America that Americans won't do. Anybody that can name a job here in this country, I can show you native-born Americans, naturalized Americans doing that job. It isn't true that there are jobs that Americans won't do.
Steve King, I have to squeeze in this tweet for you from Smiley T22. Representative King, are you going to run for Senate?
I wish I knew the answer. When I make up my mind, when I come to that conclusion, I will be the happiest person in America about that decision, whichever way it is. And I've looked at data. I've talked to people. We're very close to making a decision. And you know, when that's done, I'm going to either launch forward on a campaign that'll be all out, or I'm going to turn around and go back to running a campaign for re-election in the House. I don't know which, but I hope to be on the ballot in the fall of 2014.
What kind of data are you looking at? What's it telling you?
Well, it's anyone who would run for a U.S. Senate race in Iowa. It's an uphill. Just the records show you that Barack Obama started his movement in Iowa. And that does make a difference. And organizing for America is now looks like it's institutionalized. That all makes a difference. But then other things to think about are, I think that the cost of Obamacare hits in January 2014, and that there's an inertia then to repeal Obamacare. That could be a pivotal issue, as well as a balanced budget amendment. Those are pluses. And you look around at some of those states that they lean more Democrat than Iowa does, like Wisconsin or Pennsylvania. You've got a Ron Johnson in Wisconsin. You've got a Pat Toomey in Pennsylvania. So that makes it a plausible thing to potentially have a Steve King in Iowa.
Do you have a deadline? And if so, what is it for making a decision?
I have learned through bitter experience that setting a deadline for a tough decision is a bad idea. But it has to be a decision of the head, the gut, and the heart in that order.
Okay, well, in the coming weeks then?
Yes, I think so.
All right. Steve King, Republican of Iowa. Thank you, sir, for talking to our viewers. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Greta.